So for those of you who haven't met me before, my name's Emma. I do not live in a cave or a dark place. I don't need rescuing. I'm just very badly lit in my front room. I work for the IALD, and I'm joined in that endeavour by the lovely Beatrice, who's also on our call today. So thanks, Bea, for joining us.
Hello.
Hello. And this is the second in our series of tips and tricks that we're doing, very generously sponsored by ETC and their partners in the UK, 3LR. And today I'm joined by my good friend Tad, who's going to give us his perspective on this theme of light that we have in architecture and theatre, and how those two things have a relationship. One thing I am going to say to you before we continue is that this is recorded and will be placed on our YouTube channel later, so I hope that's acceptable to you all. I can see the little icons down the side. Amazingly, you've now been doing this for so long, this Zoom, that we all know the etiquette. So please do turn your cameras off and the microphones off, because I think it gives everybody else better connection. If you do have any questions that you want to ask, you can put them in the chat box and we can ask them at the end. That would be wonderful. Well, I think you can raise hands and things as well. So that's all great. So I think we will make a start by saying, hi Tad, how are you? Where are you?
Hi, Emma.
Where are you joining us from?
I'm in as you can see, a beautiful hotel room in, what day is it?
Thursday.
Thursday. I'm in Poznan in Poland.
And so what takes you there? What work-wise are you doing in Poland?
We're doing a little relight on a show, a bit of a theatre show. So this is all entirely relevant. Sorry, I'm just having a few minor technical issues, because as soon as that recording lady came on, it's messed with my screen. But I think I'm kind of ready to go.
Sometimes with these things, we're all used to doing things instantly, like what happens in television land, and that maybe Zoom is amazing, and there's a little bit of a delay, which is fair enough. You know, I'm talking to you from London. Feels like when Eurovision Song Contest. Here's Emma from London talking to Tad in Poland. It's got to zip up to space, bounce back down again, go through the server. For those of you who don't know, the ILD head office is in Chicago, so there's practically all continents of the world are connected on our call tonight. So thank you all for bearing with us for those getting the technical bits straight. Tad, I've known you for a very long time now, and when I first met you, I thought you were an architectural lighting designer, and that was your bag, mostly because I did that thing that you assume everybody else is like you, because I came from architecture. And it took me a while after I knew you were working at that time for a well-known architectural lighting manufacturer, that you're not actually from the world, or you did not cut your teeth in architecture at all. You actually cut your teeth in theatre. So how did that start? How did you get involved in the first place?
No, I've kind of come full circle. You're absolutely right. I think, like many people, I got involved at school. You know, it was all about lighting bands and shows, and then doing the same kind of thing at university, and not really fancying a real job after university, and going back to the circus or the theatre, as it were. I was very lucky. I got to work with some exceptional lighting designers in the sort of the heyday of musicals in the 1990s. And it was all very good. And at some point I just thought it's time to understand the maths of all of this. So I went off and did the Bartlett course. I've just been looking down the participant list, and there's an awful lot of Bartlett connected names on there as well. And that kind of took me into architecture. And recently it's been a very odd pandemic, because for me, the pandemic combined with Brexit and the fact that I came over to Poland to do about 3 weeks of work, and ended up staying here for 11.5 months, just because of quarantines and lockdowns and travel restrictions and all that. So my work has kind of shifted back towards theatre. So I guess this was a timely request from you to have a go at this.
for me, when I originally thought of the idea of theatre to architecture, you were the first person that came to mind, because I know that you do have that experience of both. So I do apologise. I put on all of my friends in this instance to bring things forward. Would it be all right if we started your slideshow, and then as we go along, I might interrupt you and ask you questions?
No, that'd be great. I do love a good interruption. A good interruption.
I will try and be as polite as possible.
I'm also trialing some new technology. So let's see what happens here. To use the theatre vernacular, I've accidentally fired Q1 twice already, and Q1 has a number of follow-ons. So it's all happened. But let's see what happens if I push this magic button here. Hopefully, what we're going to get now is the. No, I'm kind of hoping that the house lights might fade.
Or we can just chat. We can just chat. Don't worry. There's
no, it'll be fine. So it's that moment. The house lights fade. We're going to see a show, and I found myself recently asking the same question that I've asked for a long time now. I've put up the sort of the politer version there, which is, where's the magic in theatre lighting? Why is it so magical? And really, I guess the question that I wrote down in my notebook was, why is it better than architectural lighting? And some time ago, I really thought I had it nailed. I realized that actually coming from theatre and going into architecture, what was missing for me was lenses. Pretty much every single fitting you have above a theatre stage, in front of a theatre stage, with a few notable exceptions, generally has some kind of optical control, a lens, something that's going to focus a beam of light exactly where you want it and not spill it off to the side. And that to me was when I sort of first got into architecture, was a really a problematic aspect of lighting design, that I couldn't control the whole beam. At the time, we were working with tungsten lamps, metal halide lamps, whatever they were capsules, and they were sitting inside a reflector. So the reflector was controlling only half of the beam, the half of the beam that went backwards, and the rest of the light that went forwards went wherever it was going to go, with perhaps a little mechanical control. And that to me was a real issue. And I'm sort of convinced, I was convinced for some time, that the answer to my question, why is the lighting so much better, is because we have so much more control of it. We can control the beam, we can put the light exactly where we want it, from where we want it, and everything's happy. I don't think it's that straightforward now, and I've changed my mind on the answer to this question several times, and that's what I'm going to do now, is going to go through all my sort of answers and changes of mind. So what you're seeing right now is a show that we did out here in Poland a little while ago. This is a musical version of Günter Grass's Tin Drum, which is about a little boy who decides not to grow up. It's quite a convoluted story, but he remains in a 3-year-old's body despite becoming an adult, and witnesses the beginnings of World War II. And it's a fiction, but it's an interesting piece of literature. And we decided, because of the slightly grotesque nature of the piece, that actually what we were going to go for is a dirty kind of light that was going to run throughout the show. Whatever we did, however we changed the lighting, however we changed its direction, its color, its emphasis, that we were going to hold on to this sort of sense of dirtiness. Now that's the kind of language that we probably wouldn't ever use in architecture. What does dirty mean? Well, for this show, it meant actually taking a load of shin busters, that is side lights. You can probably just see in this image, if you look at the floor, you can see that there are lights that are skimming from the floor. But we used focusable, so profile fittings with gobos in them, and knocked them off focus a bit to give us this sort of grubby light. If you look at the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the two boys down the side there. They haven't got a clean beam of light on them. It's very kind of broken up, dappled. And this is a concept that we kept throughout the show, whatever we did. So I'm thinking, beam control, texture, all that kind of thing. We've got it. and we can deal with that. And then suddenly I find myself in a show that has very clean light. This is Chicago, the musical. And again, it's about fantastic beam control, the aesthetic. Whatever production of Chicago you see, the aesthetic is nearly always similar. It was pioneered by Bob Fosse back in the day, not only his choreography, but the kind of lighting that was around then, you know, the perfectly sharp circular cone of light. And again, you know, this is playing into my idea that it's all about the control. And then suddenly I realized just how much backlight there is in this image that we're seeing here. So control is one thing, but now we're looking at a technique. And later on in the show, there's a scene where an actress delivers her lines and you can't actually see her face. Her lines are delivered entirely in backlight and it works. It's powerful. This is her swan song, if you like. And now I've convinced myself that actually it's not about the beam control and all that. The real thing that separates theatre lighting from architectural lighting is our obsession with backlighting. Let's go back to the image that I put up right at the beginning, the chairs. Actually, if you dissect that image, what you're looking at is a bunch of L shapes. It's a set of right angles in red that are bright against the black background. And there's nothing else really there as a visual cue, yet it's quite evocative of a darkened auditorium. And that's how we would do it theatrically. You know, we put the light the other side of the subject from where we are. If we were to light those same chairs in an architectural way, we'd probably do it with a downlight, and we do it with a sense of uniformity, because we're all taught that uniformity is good. I will quote Charles Stone here: uniformity is evil. It gives us uniform, therefore bland spaces. So perhaps we have more visual information here about these chairs, these seats, but I don't think we have as much poetry. We don't have it, that it's not as evocative an image. So now I'm putting my beam control aside, and I'm getting absolutely obsessed with backlighting. You know, here's some hardcore backlighting there's another show. This is a slightly tongue-in-cheek musical celebration of 1970s Poland through the view of a comic strip. It's you know, these kind of pictures are very, very camera friendly. What I'm not going to be doing today is showing a whole bunch of glossy, photoshopped production images, ones that are going to go out and market a show. I mean, they're all shot by the professional photographers of each theatre. But this image actually reminds me of where we were at the time. This is a preview that we're looking at. And looking at this photograph and also looking at it in real life, I had this sense that it was completely flat, that we really needed to redesign the scene. It was quite difficult for technical reasons and where we were able to hang equipment, but it's just completely flat. This really does look like a photograph from the 1970s, and we did want to give it a bit more pizzazz than that. This photograph is from the very next day. I hope you'll agree that there's more shape to it, there's more drama, there's more excitement. I'm fairly sure it's the next day, not just because the hairstyles are different, but actually one of the actresses is different. So I'm fairly sure we've moved on a bit from the day before. So now I'm obsessed with backlight, and I'm starting to get into the physics of how this all works and why we use it in theatre so much and why we don't use it in architecture. And this is another show that we did. This is exactly the show that I'm here in Poznan right now to do a little bit of a touch-up on. And so we'll be looking at this tomorrow. It has a very strong aspect that the director really wanted to get through, was that the light in this whole piece, apart from a few very specific moments, is white. Now, white can have a number of meanings. So here we go with our white backlight, and it works fantastically, except, you know, the laws of physics are such that if you put people in backlight in white costumes, the only people who are going to be truly backlit are the people in the row, because everyone else behind them has so much light reflected off these white costumes that we're filling in. And sometimes you have to post-rationalize these things. And what we ended up doing here was, as soon as the scene's established, we've actually pumped in a little bit of extra front light for the front row just to even them up with the rest. But we're now sort of playing with physics and playing with backlighting that perhaps doesn't always work, and sometimes backlighting that isn't necessary or is harmful to our image. So now we've gone back to the tin drum. This is the 3-year-old boy that I was talking about, who grows up and remains in that body, but as an adult. We couldn't have him played by a child. So he's played by an adult actress who is a specialist in puppetry. And this is a technique known as tintoresca. And you can probably make out from the image that she's crouching behind and is wearing this small bib. So the head is hers, the hands are hers, but the body of Oscar is this bib that she's wearing. And actually in this image, by not having any backlight, we've hidden her shape, and Oscar's quite convincing. If we move on to later scenes, through her skill rather than mine, we can convince the audience that Oscar has taken off, powered by this balloon, even though she's actually lifting him off the ground. She's exceptionally talented, and I made her job harder here because I just needed some light from somewhere, and I ended up putting in a bit of side light. And even that was enough to sort of give her away. We're not trying to hide her completely, but what we don't want to do is celebrate the actress behind. And the more we do that as we go through, and I found 4 images that have progressively more and more backlight. And this is an image that the theatre loves from its marketing perspective, but I hate because it actually shows the actress rather than the character. So now I'm in a position where actually backlight isn't always fantastic, and I need a new answer to my question of where the magic is. So the obvious next point has got to be side lighting. I love side lighting. If it's not backlight, it has to be side lighting. It's a fantastic tool, and it's also a tool that works in architecture as well. This idea of sculpting an actor or a dancer, of revealing shape. It's what in architecture we might call modeling. It works brilliantly if we come in from the side, and you'll see this in ballet lighting a lot, and the very characteristic black line that you see on a leg or an arm or even a face that really shows you the shape. And we can do tricks like that in architecture too. You see them down here, these very dark lines that actually really give us the shape. The other thing it does, of course, by lighting from the side, is we're not throwing, and if we get scientific here, we're not throwing light in a perpendicular fashion straight onto the floor, which means we can keep the floor a different color from the actors that we're working with. I said not all the images are going to be super professional. This is a shot from an open dress rehearsal that I took from way up by the lighting position. It's a student graduate show where the major scenery element was a pile of sand. We had absolutely no budget for this show, and what budget there was went on about 25 10-kilo bags of sand. So there was absolutely no money left for the lighting, but we still needed to play with this. And actually the sand was very, very shallow. And what we've got here, if you like, is your typical office lighting. This is pretty much a downlight to give it, to flatten the image as much as possible. The actors have just been running around with brooms and made this chessboard. But just, I mean, these are just 2 iPhone photographs, but again, with no budget really, but all we did was take the fittings that they had in their storeroom somewhere and put them on the floor and brought them across the sand. And suddenly this 2 centimeters of sand looks like it's 10 centimeters thick and has some depth to it. And we were able to, even as I say, in a rehearsal shot from an iPhone, get some kind of sense that we're in a desert here. This is a show called The Walls of Jericho. And then again, with limited resources, we went for some old tricks here, which is okay, so we've got all these side lights. What if we only use one side of them? You can create extra sculpture by doing that, and also by dimming them down with a particular filter that we had over the front of these, and then dimming them down to about 30%. We can almost change the color from an almost white light to an almost amber light. So again, something for nothing, but still my favorite side light. But I got to thinking now about color, because we can do so much just by choosing the right gel and dimming the light to the right level that we've changed its color. And I got back to thinking about the show that we're doing here and how important white was. And that's something that we think about in architecture a lot, that the quality of white is a really big issue for us. I would imagine of the designers tuned in here, everyone's had that experience at some point, that you've specified a whole load of 3000K downlights, but they're from different manufacturers, and you put them in the ceiling and they're a different color. So on this show, we actually spent one entire day programming white. There were 11 different types of moving light or color changing light with different technologies inside each one. Some were LED, some were metal halide. I don't think we had any tungsten, so predominantly those two, but some had additive color mixing, some had subtractive, some were simple RGB, then there was RGBW, and then there were 7 color fixtures. So a devil of a job to create a white. And then we decided that we needed lots of whites. So we were creating warm whites and cool whites, and sometimes our cool whites weren't just, following what we would call a CCT. So we're trying to follow a tungsten curve. Sometimes we were going off that curve and looking for slightly more sort of lavender colors, a clear tungsten and a subtle change to a warmer tungsten, a much warmer light, a sort of suggested artificial sunlight, but then also a white that's cut through with a bit of a lime, a green, to give it that sort of sinister approach. And in the end, we ended up with a palette of 6 different whites that we were able to mix and match. And in this image, it actually works on the actors, but you can see it most obviously on the concrete set behind them, the 2 different hues that actually give you a sense of the shape we're looking at. I'd love to say it was all fantastically successful, but actually at some point, we tried to do a silhouette and realized that the fittings that we had lighting our backdrop weren't actually as good as they should have been. And what we've got here is a cheap Far Eastern product that has an RGB color mixing, but the colors don't integrate well. Again, this isn't just a theatre problem, it's an architecture problem too. If you can have your red, green and blue that can give you 16 million colors, we're told, but if you can't get those colors to mix together before they've left the fitting, then you could end up with a situation as we had here. Of course, the camera exaggerates this, but you've got bits of the wall that are shifting towards green, some are going towards lavender, some are even going towards amber. And all we were trying desperately to do was to create white. One of our successful scenes where the white really worked. Unfortunately, the camera here has given us away. And you can probably see on the characters nearest to us downstage, left and right. So their side light is coming from RGB LED fixtures. And LED, when you photograph it, has this tendency to shift towards lavender, towards violet. When we were allowed to go out, we were starting to see that people's photographs from their nights out, from bars, from clubs, starting to have this sort of pink lavender hue as a standard base color. And that's really because of the LEDs that we're going to. So allow me a small science lesson. This is, pay attention, this is the science bit. We quite often hear the complaint from lighting designers that, I've got a 3000K fitting from one manufacturer and a 3000K from somebody else, and they don't match up. Well, actually, it's perfectly possible that both manufacturers are giving you a decent and correct color rendering. So looking at this CIE curve, for those who aren't familiar with this, I looked down the list of participants. I think most of you have seen one of these before, but for those that haven't, this is the same as the color wheel that you have in Photoshop or any other program nowadays, only it's the correct or corrector shape that it should be. Around the outside, from left to right, you've got 380 to 700 nanometers. Those are your pure wavelengths. It's a rainbow. In the middle are all the colors you can create by mixing different wavelengths. And the straight line across the bottom is the magic line between red and blue. And that's where we find magenta, which is the worst color in the world, but also quite a good color. But we're seeing an awful lot of it at the moment because of the way it affects our eyes. It's very easy to create a magenta at very high light levels just by mixing red and blue. It's just a function of the way we see. The curved line is our black body locus. So if we warm a piece of metal like a tungsten and take it through different temperatures, once we get to about 1,000 degrees, we start to see it glow red. And the hotter we take it, the more light it gives off, and the whiter that light gets. And that line is the color temperature line. The lines that go sideways from it, bear with me. Right, the lines that go sideways from it, or in this case up down, those are the correlated color temperature. Now this is something that we need to understand, that correlation is moving away from the actual point. So for example, the 4000K line that you can see there, 4000K doesn't give you a point, it gives you a whole set of numbers. So actually you could have a CCT of 4000, but if you have a high DUV, the distance from the line, then your 4000K could be verging towards green or verging towards pink and still be entirely valid as a 4000K light source. Right, science lesson over. Let's get back to the fun stuff. So now that I've convinced myself that color integrity is the way to go, well, what if we want to go for really bonkers colors and really start playing? The show you're seeing here is this is Pretty Woman, the musical. It's done in a very sort of avant-garde style. The set designer and the costume designer both went a bit nuts with colors and chaos. So I was left with a choice of either fighting them or joining them. But the set design itself has a, although it looks like a complete cacophony here, there is how should we put it? There's a clever artistic or scientific concept behind this. And that is that if you paint your set in 3 secondary colors, so cyan, magenta, and yellow, but then you light it with primary colors, red, green, and blue, you should be able to fish out of that different images. So I won't go through all the permutations, but if you, for example, you take the green light on this, anything that is in magenta should go to black. And the other colors should reflect the green equally. So you're pulling out anything that was painted in magenta. It works for green, it works for red, it works for blue too, but anyone who's trying to photograph blue light will know how saturated blue LEDs mess with digital cameras nowadays. It's a really difficult thing to do. The other thing that you'll notice, of course, is that the white light isn't really white. That's an RGB, so it's red plus green plus blue. And this is something that Christopher was talking about in his presentation back in July, I think. I think he said, if you're trying to get white out of an RGB fitting, then good luck. And that's pretty much true. We could go into the science of why that is, but anyone that tells you that you've got 16 million colors out of an RGB fitting, all they're doing is multiplying 256 times 256 times 256, because that's the signals that you can send it, but it doesn't actually give you that variety of color. And importantly, it doesn't give you quite often the colors that you want it to give you. You might just be able to make out in the blue, I don't know how well this is translating across the waves, there is Marilyn Monroe's face on the floor there. If I go to my little magic button here, you should be able to see there's an eye here, there's an eye here, there's a mouth here, and over here there's hair. It doesn't, the blue doesn't work particularly well, but if we look at the green and the red, these two are exceptionally good. So these are actual photographs. There's no simulation or anything. I've taken 2 photographs and just wiped across them. And if we wipe from the green to the red, what you can see changes dramatically. And it's really great fun. And it was a fantastic concept up until the point where you have to put actors in it. And as soon as you put a cast in there, you need to light them in white, and you start to destroy your clever concept. So he spent a lot of time trying to hide side light beams that were coming into the sides from the actors and get them to sort of disappear off to the side, because unfortunately we still don't have a luminaire where we can get the light to go 20 yards and then stop. So that's an issue, but it's definitely an issue that when the light integrates, it brings us back to the original colors, and it becomes a bit of a mess again. So let's go back to a good white show, much more fun. But I said that this show also had some very significant color aspects to it. And one of those was the signaling of emotions through, or the controlling of emotions through color. That was the construct within the narrative of the piece. So again, it goes to the primary colors, the red, the green, and the blue, to as controlling colors in this environment that we find ourselves in. And in fact, the 3-point lamp that you see at the back is supposed to be some kind of Big Brother style controlling element. I'm fascinated by the red now, so I've moved away from my fascinations of backlight and sidelight and integrity of white light, and I'm fascinated by the emotional response that we have to red light, particularly on stage, and particularly when you flood the whole stage with it. If anyone's interested, a great series of seminars by Colin Ball. Emma, you might be able to help me at some point, whether they're available online somewhere. But he started off looking at red light from a scientific and a cultural point of view. And then I think he moved on to blue. I'm not sure we've managed to convince him to go to green yet. But there's a lot there, way too much for what I would have now. Magenta, our world is full of magenta now because it's so easy to make out of LEDs. You put on a red LED, you put on a blue LED, you mix them together and you get this light that seems to be brighter than the sum of the 2 sources that you had in the first place. And it gives us this color that we're now seeing everywhere. And I start answering my own question about why lighting is more magical in theatre with a question, and that's why. Why are we doing the things we're doing? Why are we lighting this 14th century pub in color changing LEDs that spend most of their time in a sort of magenta or a green color? In theatre, I think we ask the question more, and we ask what the colors that we're using, what significance they have to the narrative, how they help tell the story, how they help set the mood, how they work, in that sense of total theatre, how they work with the other elements, with the movement, with the music, with the vocal. So red is fascinating for me, and then I find myself going back to Chicago, where we can allow ourselves that kind of Fosse-esque kitsch, and perhaps kitsch is unkind. Maybe camp is kind of, no, it's this sort of, kitsch is probably a good word. It's a very focused, sharp beam. It's very clear colors. When you've got 2 people lying on the floor in very sharp red spotlights, they're probably dead. And actually, I've now shifted away from my fascination for red, and now I'm thinking about the big round spot. That's a strange construct. It's purely down to the physics of manufacturing a luminaire. In natural light, we don't get perfectly round beams of light, yet every luminaire we manufacture seems to take that as a starting point, that we're creating a circular cone of light. We've also got a cultural convention. We accept that a circular cone of light says, hello, important, Hollywood, star. Again, it's an image that isn't perhaps the glossiest one. I might have some notes for the follow spot operator on this one about being a little generous with the sizing here, but we've made a clear statement that the texture that we're applying to all the other characters on stage turns them perhaps into the structure, into the scenery. They're secondary. The star is the one in the big spot. A spot from above, again, it doesn't have to be red to say you're dead. Somehow that sharp round spot does that for us. And now we can start even mixing the concepts, the side light, the backlight, and this sharp spot from the front. And now we can create stars. So you've got all your dancers there, all the movement, all the choreography exposed and celebrated, but we can still punch through and say, we're going to put a light straight in somebody's face so you can see their expression and know that they're the star. And now I'm thinking, well, of course we can do that, but we don't have to do it with a hard-edged beam. You can do that kind of thing. You can highlight part of a show, but of course we're back to Chicago here, which ironically is the one where I said actually the hard-edged beams work. And here we can do it in a much softer way. And then we can do it in a kind of close-up way. So let's go, here's another science lesson. The inverse square law is definitely our friend in theatre for doing funky effects like this. Sometimes it's our friend, sometimes it's our enemy in architecture. But if I can take a small light source and bring it close to the subject, it has this fantastic effect of the light disappearing very quickly. Other than the frame behind our actor, the light doesn't go very far at all. If you increase the distance from the light source to the object that you're lighting by double, you're reducing the light intensity to a quarter. So if you treble it, you're reducing it to a ninth. So all of a sudden, using these small sources and bringing them close to actors gives us a whole new ability to play with drama. So we can again take a low budget show, we take a wooden frame, put a little LED strip around it, and suddenly we've highlighted an actor, an actress from within a solid color all around. And then while we're playing with our physics, and as much as I was bemoaning earlier on the fact that you can light an actor who's wearing white and suddenly he throws all the light backwards behind him onto the one behind, the actress on the right-hand side here has no light coming from the front at all. You can see that because the frames in front of her are dark. All we've done is thrown a massive, massive backlight onto those frames, which you can see around the edges. And what's lighting her face is the soft reflection from the sides of that. So as much as physics was against us, sometimes it works for us. And now I'm starting to think about control. And control in every sense of the word, that on the stage we can control a light and focus it right down, and we can have the light where we want it, and most importantly, not have it where we don't want it. But I can't say control without going into electronics, and I promised myself I wasn't going to go into this because this could be 2 days worth of discussion about electronics and electronic control. But this is an image that I think is of our time. This is the Eurovision Song Contest 2019, which is probably the largest indoor, or in terms of complexity, the largest indoor lighting display anywhere. To give you an idea for those who aren't au fait with this stuff, if I point out this lighting desk here, that is a big, powerful lighting desk that would generally be capable of running a West End show. Now, if you look around the room, there's one of those here, there's one here, there's another one over here somewhere, there's a couple here, there's a guy over here who feels kind of like I would if I was surrounded by all of this stuff. Massive, massive amounts of control technology, multiple pilots flying these things to get the whole thing off the ground. I don't think there's much more I need to say that the level of control sophistication in the theatre entertainment world is streets ahead of what we're seeing in architecture. We perhaps don't need it in architecture. let's move on from this. Actually, for me, this is a more impressive setup. London, if you look around, there's a mantelpiece on the left, there's a set of curtains in front. This is about 3 o'clock in the morning, I believe. And this is the lighting desk operator for Waitress the musical being staged. So they're in tech in Tokyo. To the left, Ken Billington, the lighting designer with 2 associates, also plugged in. They're in New York in his office. These guys are at the production table in Tokyo, and this is also Tokyo, but this is a view of the stage and what's going on. So what we have is a lighting designer in New York calling the shots. We have the main board operator sitting in his front room in London with the curtains drawn because it's just coming up to dawn. Everyone's on different time zones. And all of these desks, ETC desks, I have to say, all of these desks are seamlessly wired together. And behind that is a whole mountain of new layers of communication. So there's a video link that gives high quality video. There's an audio link that the sound engineers are using to make sure that they're getting good sound. Then that sound is being shared to all the other disciplines. Then each discipline has its own chat line on a Zoom. I have somewhere from Rob Halliday, who was the programmer on this, a whole set of schematics of how people were communicating and all the different boxes and things that they used, because they had to, in the pandemic, light a musical remotely. I didn't think it was remotely possible, but it seems they managed it quite well. And I would suggest anyone who's interested, there's a link up there, all the W's, showlight.org, a set of videos from the last Showlight, which was virtual. And there's the presentation on there from Rob, from Ken Billington and their associate about how they lit both Waitress and I think Billy Elliot remotely. Absolutely fascinating watching for any geeks out there. Right, well, I'm going to sort of draw towards a close. I will throw up some architecture images. I was deeply saddened walking through UCL to find that the whole place had gone magenta. But then I found myself in Krakow in Poland, my kind of hometown while I'm here. And I was thinking, well, you know, at least things are a little better. You know, the lightings are a little better until I waited a little longer. I might have to press this button one more time to get it to go. So this is a video. And this is my most hated thing in the whole world, a kind of mindless red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue cycle, which guarantees that you're going to go through my favorite magenta every cycle, and the whole building's going to light up. And this brings me back to my other question of why. Maybe that's why everything's better in theatre, because we ask the question why and we only respond in the way that we need to. But I was heartened, you know, walking around the corner from this to find a catenary system. Simple light down a street, and actually what it's doing is giving us a single source and it's giving us backlight. I'm back on my backlight idea. All of this texture that you're seeing here is through the backlight. And then the contrast, the lack of uniformity. And this was a cold night just 3 nights ago when I got bored of looking at magenta buildings and needed to find some inspiration. This is a cemetery that has no lighting in it at all, but you've got spill light from sodium lights at one side, and the other side of the cemetery are work lights and lights from a petrol station that are in a completely different hue, and there's something in the sky. And suddenly all of this becomes magical without having been designed. And then I go around the corner and I find some human intervention where we've actually designed something and put lights on top of an entranceway. And all they're doing, it seems to me, is causing glare into the windows and lighting the air conditioning units. So I get a little disappointed by that because I can't see the reasoning for it. Where's the why? Where's the narrative and where's the precision? And I think those are my 2 ending points. that the magic in theatre lighting comes from those two aspects, that there is a narrative, and it's not just that there's a narrative that tells us a story, but there's also a narrative that we as designers have to follow. We also need a certain precision. The character to the left is the important one, and she's been highlighted. The lead character is the one on his knees. Sorry, the lead character, the highlighted character is to the right, the lead character is to the left, with his head in his hands. And even though he's highlighted, we don't see his face, and that kind of fits with what we were trying to say here, and the anonymity that we were trying to create. Here we were trying to create, in a small part of a very big stage, the sense of a party in a tiny flat, and the claustrophobic nature of that. And then here we were looking at creating anonymity in a cinema. You know, somewhere in the cinema is a murderer. How do you create anonymity? Well, you treat the people as if they were structures and sculptures, and you backlight them, and the only people who actually have any front light on them are the singer in this case, and the lead character. Again, if you come back to the narrative, we can make warm light sinister, which is an odd thing. And through our precision, we can do things like keeping a floor, other than obviously the spot that we wanted on the main characters. We come back to the side light, and we can separate our characters from a projected actually floor, and not spoiling that. So I think to round up, I'm guessing, Emma, you're probably pushing me along a bit now. I guess the finale for me is this idea of precision and narrative that exist in theatre that perhaps we haven't quite got in architecture. And always, you know, whatever else you've done, you need big bright lights at the end. You need to shine them in the audience's eyes. Audiences love it. We would call that glare. I think I've spilt my beans, Emma.
Oh, do you know what? You gave us so many things to think about, and you touched on so many topics. I feel so behind and not as well educated as you are on this topic at all. I mean, such a lovely, so Anna Spukum, our great friend, it's a great talk. Trylski, thank you very much. Big congratulations from David, and our lovely.
Oh, is Anna here? That's nice.
Yes, Anna's here. And the lovely,
hello, Anna.
the lovely Zubos is stayed up till very late in the night. I think he's in India. And
I wouldn't miss it. Yeah.
Thank you.
And he's asking, what's the big difference you'd see between the old lighting, conventional lighting in theatre, and now the LED? So I guess that's the lovely, the tungsten versus LED question. Do you miss,
yeah,
I think it's probably moved on now a bit, but
yeah, it has. I'm happy to hit that. Let me just go for this, just so that when Kevin puts the montage together, the credits are up there, because
yeah, we don't want to get shouted
at. I think I should. There were some pretty good photographers who made some pretty average lighting look quite sexy. Yeah, the LED thing is really interesting, and particularly since I would say the market leader, who are ETC, are sponsoring us via 3LR. The stuff that's coming out of ETC now is answering all the questions that we had before. So I talked about an RGB luminaire, and 5-10 years ago, we were saying, if you've got red, green and blue, you can make any color you like. And then it turns out you can only make 16 million colors. And then it turns out that only 24 of those are any use at all. And now we're understanding that we have to widen the gamut. We have to, because LEDs give you such a narrow wavelength band, we need more of them in different wavelengths in order to create those subtle colors that we've always been able to create through a continuous source like tungsten with gel over the front of it. And I'm really excited. I love using the new sort of 5-color or 7-color fittings. Other manufacturers are doing it too. It's it's just a joy to have an LED luminaire that can give you a nice color, the color that you wanted, and not the color that you had to go with because it was the closest you could get to actually what you wanted to achieve. And the other thing I'm starting to love about LEDs, which it's taken me a while to get here, is the fact that if you dim them, they don't change color. And I always wanted them to do that, but I now quite like having a low level color that's very cool and gray and dirty. There we go again.
I think the dirty light was a brilliant description and used very well in what you were trying to do. I think there's probably some comfort actually in being able to dial the new fixtures to be where you want them to be. But I think you would agree that still mock-ups are very much something that has to be done, because even in the catalogues it says it does one thing, and then when you turn it on, in theatre lights and architectural ones, they're not quite the same, you know, so you do need to still make those mock-ups and so on.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're about to transfer the show that we have here to a different theatre, and we'll do most of that work in a simulation package on an electronic desk, but we'll do it based on presets and palettes, because we know that we can't anticipate those. And when we get to our theatre the other end and we power up the rig and we see what it's doing, what we then end up doing is adjusting all those presets and palettes. It's almost like working in a word processor where you set a heading style. And if you decide that you want your heading font a little bit bigger, you change the heading, you change the font of the heading style, and all your headings that are referenced back to that style change with it. And we do exactly the same thing. So we prepare our desk so that it can so that we can work quickly on site and say that white isn't white, now it's white, update everything, job done, go to the pub.
I like that bit. I do agree with you that we shouldn't just be putting light up on buildings, interiors, or anywhere really, unless it's needed. You need to think a bit more why are we doing that, and the excuse for LEDs being more efficient than old versions of halides, sodium, whatever, tungsten. That's not really the excuse to use more to make up the difference. If it's not needed, let's not put light there. I think it's a good way to go. I'm going to have to close the session down.
For me, why is the most important question.
Mr. Zoom, yeah, why exactly? Mr. Zoom is going to cut us off. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to put to Tad, please email me, emma@iald.org, and I will put those to my good friend, Mr. Trylski, and we will get back to you. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session, which is next week, with the lovely Jessica, who's going to be talking us through her theatrical education. She's an ex-student of Rose Bruford and much celebrated in the theatre world, so I look forward to that too. So good night, everybody, and thank you, Tad.